Well, hello and welcome back to our Realtors and Reducing Taxes Comprehensive Tax Cut course for realtors like yourself working as independent contractors. Now, in this section, before we really get into the Schedule C itself, we want to do a little preliminary discussion here on hobby versus business. This is going to be very important because it's going to impact whether or not you can deduct the losses from your business and how your income is calculated if you actually have a hobby and not a business. Over the years, we threw this in here because over the years, many individuals that are in real estate who, quote unquote, as you may see, dabble in real estate, just in it to keep their license, oftentimes they're deducting items. They're not really a business. It's more of a hobby for them. So we want to make sure you don't fall into what we call the hobby tax trap. We want to make sure that you legitimately have a business and you get to deduct any losses that you may have from that business. So let's go over what a hobby versus a business is. We would say, do you consistently participate in the activity? And what we mean by that, are you truly and actively seeking profit? Well, most people say, yeah, of course I'm seeking profit. However, that's not always the case. Regular and active, you're regularly and active in your real estate business, and if you consistently earn a profit, you don't have any worries. However, if in your business you consistently lose money, we want you to beware because the IRS could come back and you would have to prove that you are legitimately in business, which we're going to show you how to do in this course section. But we will make you aware that we want to make sure you have a business and not a hobby. And if you truly treat real estate as a hobby, you really shouldn't be claiming losses year after year. Now, this kind of makes sense because businesses exist primarily, and you notice I have in caps there, you're in business to make money. You're in business to generate more money than you spend. You're in business to make a profit. Hobbies exist for a different reason, not necessarily a profit motive. You may find other enjoyment out of a hobby. You may just be trying to keep your real estate license and taking the continuing education courses just in case you decide to get back in a later date. Does that really mean you're in business? Probably not. Businesses file Schedule C. That's the purpose of this course. Hobbies, however, cannot file Schedule C. Really, because of the new tax law, you really can't deduct those losses at all, your expenses. You have to count your income as 921, other income on the 1040 without any losses. Businesses can lose money. Hobbies cannot lose money on a tax return. Hobbies must report all income, as I said a moment ago, on line 21, other income of your 1040, Form 1040. The income is not subject to self-employment tax, which we'll discuss later. That's a major tax you're going to pay, so that's good. However, expenses are limited and they are considered miscellaneous itemized deductions on Schedule A, which means they're subject to 2% of your AGI. And the new tax law, as I'm speaking with you right now, the 2018, starting in 2018, there's no such thing as miscellaneous itemized deductions. So from 2018 forward, for at least the next 10 years, if you're a hobby, you don't get to deduct anything. You count your income on line 21, don't have any expenses to offset it anywhere on the tax return. So what we want to do is make sure you are legitimately in business and you can defend yourself to the IRS if they try to argue you're a hobby. So let's take a look at some signs the IRS will look at to see if you're really in business or not, or if it's a hobby. Okay, businesses can lose money, but consistently losing money, you just ask why. Why are you consistently losing money year after year? Basic rule is 2 out of 5 years, 50% of the time, you've got to generate a profit. Is it because you're dabbling in business? This could be a sign that you have a hobby and not a business. Are you just keeping your license active just in case you get a big contract, or you get a big listing, or someone in your family says they want to buy a house or they want to sell their house and you can help them out with that? If you're just keeping your license just in case, hey, you might have a hobby and not a business. If you're working full-time job at another business, another location, you have a full-time job, and you haven't had a chance to make a serious effort, that could be a sign that you have a hobby and not a business. So what we want you to be able to do is prove that you're in business. There's two ways to prove that you're in business and your business is not a hobby. This probably, if you have the money to take this course and you're really serious about real estate, this isn't going to apply to you, but in the future, if you decide to slow down a little bit, this might apply to you later, or you may have friends that are just dabbling in real estate. You may want to make sure you share this information with them because it can really help them out, save them a ton of trouble if the IRS comes looking at their tax returns. Two ways, back to where I was, 2 ways to prove you're in business. Number one is to make a profit 3 out of 5 years. That means you're generating a profit on your tax return 3 out of 5 years. The IRS won't come looking at you for the most part and argue that you really have a hobby and not a business, unless they can say you're just doing that artificially creating a profit to show that you have a business and you can take losses in other years. Hopefully you're not doing that. Don't artificially generate a profit to show you're in business. Or you prove you have a profit motive. Now, just because you're having losses year after year doesn't mean you can't take those losses. It just means the IRS may want you to prove that you have a legitimate business and not a hobby. So what we're going to have to do is prove that you have a profit motive, that you're really in business with the expectation of at some point earning a profit, and you're trying real hard to create one. That's what you got to show the IRS. So how are you going to show them you have a profit motive? If they come knocking, if you're having losses year after year, a lot of times you start a business, you may have losses a few years. That's kind of normal, but you want to show the IRS that you are legitimately in business to generate a profit. How do you do that? Show the activity was ran in a serious, business-like manner. You need to show that the time and effort you put into the activity indicates a profit intent. And also you can show that you depend on the activity at some point to pay your bills. You are dependent on the income. So therefore, at some point, you've got to generate a profit. You may be going into debt at this point because you have an expectation of profit, but you need to show that expectation of profit to prove you're in business. You're trying really hard, but your losses are due to circumstances beyond your control. You're changing your behavior. Maybe you've hired consultants. Maybe you're reading books. Maybe you're doing whatever you can to get over that hump and generate a profit. That's good to know, but it's something you may have to prove if you're losing money year after year. 3 out of 5 years, more than 50% of the time, you should become very aware of this, be able to prove that you're legitimately in business. Maybe you made profit in the good years, but in the profits you make in that good year far outweigh the losses. Maybe the type of real estate you're selling is the type where one big deal, you can live off of it for a couple years. Maybe you're selling those types of commercial properties, really high-end properties where, one sale every few years, that's going to make up for your losses. You show that, that's a really good argument with the IRS. So that you're actively pursuing a high return market and profit is coming, just like I mentioned a second ago. Maybe you're really in that type of clientele or marketing those types of products or selling those types of products or searching for buyers that are really, have a high return and a profit's coming in a couple of years when you do make that big sale. Now there's no silver bullet here. The more items that you can find to show that you have a profit motive. We're probably going to have this in the resource section, like a little checklist for a hobby versus a business versus a hobby, which you may need to prove to the IRS to help you go through there. But it's really, this is kind of a gray area. The more boxes you can check a business versus a hobby, the better your chance of proving to the IRS that you're allowed to take your losses on Schedule C. So that's it for that section. We'll see you in the next one.